A teacher gives shoes to a poor student. Years later, he bought an entire school just for her. Welcome back and enjoy the story. Catherine Marshall hugged her thin coat tighter around her body as she trudged through the snow-covered streets of Chicago. The bitter January wind cut through the worn fabric like it wasn't even there, but she couldn't afford a new one, not when her 3 children needed food on the table and heat in their cramped apartment, heat that only functioned when temperatures plummeted below freezing, as if the building manager was doing them some grand favor. At 42, Catherine's face carried the quiet dignity of someone who had weathered too many storms. Her amber eyes, once described as glowing with possibility by the man who'd left her 8 years ago, now held a more tempered light. Determination, shadowed by exhaustion. Her hands, red and chapped from washing dishes in too cold water, clutched a stack of carefully graded papers as she approached West Side Elementary, where she had taught 3rd grade for 11 years. The school building loomed ahead, a weathered brick structure with windows that rattled when the L train passed nearby. It wasn't much, but to Catherine, it was sacred ground. The one place where she could make a difference, where her words might plant seeds that would bloom long after she was gone. "Good morning, Miss Marshall," the school secretary, Mrs. Winters, called as Catherine stamped snow from her boots in the entrance hall. "Principal Hoffman wants to see you before first bell." Catherine's stomach tightened. Richard Hoffman had been appointed principal 6 months ago, and he seemed to view teachers as expenses rather than assets. Every conversation with him left her feeling diminished, like she was justifying her existence rather than discussing education. "Did he say what it's about?" Catherine asked, trying to keep the weariness from her voice. "Budget concerns, I think," Mrs. Winters replied, with a sympathetic grimace. "You know how he gets near the end of the quarter?" Catherine nodded, hanging her coat in the staff room. The sleeve had a tear she needed to mend, but that would have to wait. She smoothed her simple navy dress, thrift store purchased but carefully maintained, and headed toward the principal's office. Walking past her classroom, she glanced inside at the 28 desks arranged in neat rows. Her gaze lingered on the back corner where, for the past month, a new student had been sitting, Danny Turner. The boy had transferred mid-year, arriving with incomplete records and eyes that looked too old for his 8-year-old face. Something about Danny had touched Catherine's heart from the moment she saw him. Perhaps it was how he flinched at loud noises, or how he hoarded the graham crackers from snack time in his pockets. Or maybe it was the shoes, tattered sneakers held together with knotted string, completely inadequate for Chicago's brutal winter. Principal Hoffman's lecture about budget constraints faded to background noise as Catherine sat across from him, her mind still on Danny. She'd tried reaching his parents several times. The phone number in his file was disconnected, and the address listed was for a motel on the city's west side, known for weekly rentals. "Are you even listening, Miss Marshall?" Hoffman's sharp voice broke through her thoughts. "Yes, of course," she replied automatically. "You were saying we need to reduce classroom supply expenses." "Not reduce, eliminate." His thin lips pressed into a line. "At least until next quarter's funding arrives. The district is freezing discretionary spending." "Effective immediately," Catherine's heart sank. The discretionary supplies he referred to included the extra notebooks she ordered for children who couldn't afford them, the granola bars she kept in her desk for students who came to school hungry, and the reading materials she used to supplement, the outdated textbooks. "Mr. Hoffman, many of our students rely on those supplies. They don't have—" "That's not the school's problem, Miss Marshall." He cut her off with a dismissive wave. "We're educators, not social workers. Our job is to teach the curriculum with the resources provided. If parents can't supply basic necessities, there are government programs for that." Catherine bit her tongue. She knew all too well how inadequate those programs could be, how many hoops a person had to jump through just to be told they made $2 too much to qualify. She'd been through it herself after Thomas left, when the child support checks dwindled and then stopped altogether. "I understand," she said quietly, though she didn't. Not really. How could anyone understand denying children what they needed most? The first bell rang, saving her from further discussion. She rose from her chair, clutching her gradebook to her chest like armor. "One more thing," Hoffman called as she reached the door. The Turner boy, I've received complaints that he smells. See that it's addressed. We have standards to maintain. Heat rose to Catherine's cheeks. Danny is experiencing housing insecurity. Mr. Hoffman, his family is... Not my department, he interrupted again. Handle it discreetly, but handle it. We can't have one child disrupting the learning environment for others. Catherine left without responding, her fingernails digging. Crescent moons into her palms. The injustice of it burned in her throat. This easy dismissal of a child suffering by someone who had probably never missed a meal in his life. As students began filtering into the building, stomping snow from boots and chattering excitedly, Catherine took a steadying breath and made her way to her classroom. She arranged the day's materials on her desk, wrote the schedule on the blackboard, and positioned herself by the door to greet each child by name as they entered. "Good morning, Sophia." "Hello, Michael." "That's a lovely scarf, Jennifer." She watched carefully for Danny, but even as the second bell rang, signaling the start of class, his desk remained empty. Catherine began the morning routine with a forced cheerfulness, leading the Pledge of Allegiance and taking attendance, but her eyes kept drifting to the empty seat in the back row. 15 minutes into their math lesson, the classroom door creaked open. Danny stood in the doorway, shivering visibly, his thin jacket soaked from the snow. But it was his feet that made Catherine's heart constrict. He wore only socks, sodden and grey against the linoleum floor. "I'm sorry I'm late, Ms. Marshall," he whispered, eyes downcast. "I couldn't... My shoes broke all the way. I tried to fix them, but..." Catherine moved quickly to the door, positioning herself to block the other children's view. "It's all right, Danny," she said softly. "Come with me for a moment. Class, please work on problems 3 through 10 while I step out." In the empty hallway, Catherine knelt before the trembling boy. "Danny, where are your shoes?" His eyes, deep brown and wary, met hers briefly before darting away. "The string broke. They fell apart on the way. I tried to walk fast, but the snow..." His voice faltered, and Catherine saw what it cost this proud child to admit his need. "Wait here," she said, squeezing his shoulder gently. Catherine hurried to her office, a converted storage closet barely large enough for a desk. From her bottom drawer she pulled out her own winter boots, not new but sturdy and lined with synthetic fur. She'd saved for 3 months to buy them. Wearing her old pair long past their usefulness, without hesitation she returned to Danny. "These might be a bit big," she said, helping him slip his cold feet into the boots. "But we can stuff the toes with some paper until we find you a better pair." Danny looked up at her with confusion that slowly transformed into something like wonder. "But aren't these yours, Ms. Marshall? What will you wear?" Catherine smiled, ignoring the cold that already seeped through her thin-soled flats. "I have another pair," she lied smoothly, "and it looks like you need these more than I do right now." For the first time since he'd arrived at Westside Elementary, Danny smiled, a small, uncertain curving of his lips that transformed his face from wary to simply young. In that moment, Catherine knew she would have given him every pair of shoes. She owned just to preserve that look. "Thank you," he whispered, with a dignity that belied his years. "You're welcome," she replied, something fierce and protective unfurling in her chest. "Now let's get back to math, shall we?" As they returned to the classroom, Catherine felt the cold floor through her flats with each step, but her heart was unexpectedly warm. She hadn't solved all of Danny's problems, far from it, but for now his feet were dry. Sometimes she thought that had to be enough. What she didn't know then, standing in that hallway with a shivering boy in 2 big boots, was that this small act of kindness, this impulsive, necessary gift, would alter the course of not just Danny's life but her own. That morning, with snow falling steadily outside the windows of Westside Elementary, Catherine Marshall set in motion a chain of events that would, years later, return to her door with a force she could never have imagined. The faculty lounge at Westside Elementary had once been a science lab, evidenced by the gas valves still protruding from the walls and the acid-stained countertops. Now it served as a refuge for weary teachers between classes, a place where they could complain about administrative demands, share teaching strategies, or simply sit in exhausted silence with a cup of mediocre coffee. Catherine entered during her planning period, her feet numb from walking through slush in her flats. She tried to be discreet as she sat at the small table in the corner, placing her feet directly over the heating vent in the floor. "Catherine, you're not wearing boots. In this weather?" Nancy Fillmore, the fifth-grade teacher, looked up from her magazine with raised eyebrows. "Did you forget them at home?" Before Catherine could formulate a response, Vice Principal Gloria Winters entered the lounge, her sharp gaze immediately landing on Catherine's inappropriate footwear. Gloria had been at Westside for 20 years and prided herself on running a tight ship. Her philosophy was simple: rules existed for a reason, and sentimentality had no place in education. "Miss Marshall," she said, her voice carrying across the room, "I trust you have an explanation for your lack of proper winter attire. We can hardly expect students to follow dress code if teachers themselves demonstrate such poor judgment." Catherine felt heat rise to her face. "I had an unexpected situation this morning," she said carefully. Gloria's eyes narrowed. "Would this situation have anything to do with Danny Turner arriving to Miss Peterson's gym class wearing what appeared to be women's boots?" The lounge fell silent, all eyes now fixed on Catherine. She straightened in her chair, summoning dignity despite her damp feet and the embarrassment burning her cheeks. Danny's shoes were falling apart. He walked to school in socks through the snow. I had an extra pair of boots that I let him borrow. The lie about having an extra pair came easier the second time. "You gave a student your own shoes?" Gloria's voice carried equal parts disbelief and disapproval. "Catherine, we've discussed appropriate boundaries before. This kind of emotional overinvestment is precisely what Principal Hoffman has been concerned about." From across the room, Marilyn Spencer, the school counselor, sighed audibly. "Gloria, for heaven's sake, the child needed shoes." Catherine was being kind. "Kind, perhaps, but professionally inappropriate," Gloria countered. "There are proper channels for these situations, forms to be filled out, resources that can be contacted. Giving personal items to students blurs professional lines and creates dependency." Catherine's patience, already worn thin by her meeting with Hoffman that morning, finally snapped. "While we're filling out forms in triplicate and waiting for resources that may never come, should Danny just go without shoes, maybe develop frostbite? Would that be professionally appropriate?" A tense silence followed her outburst. Gloria's mouth thinned to a dangerous line. "I should remind you, Miss Marshall, that emotional stability is a requirement for teaching at this institution. Perhaps you should consider whether your personal circumstances are affecting your professional judgment." The barb struck exactly where intended. Everyone in the room knew about Catherine's struggle to support her 3 children on a teacher's salary since her husband left. It was Gloria's way of reminding Catherine of her precarious position, both financially and professionally. Catherine stood, gathering her papers with shaking hands. "My personal circumstances give me insight, not impairment," she said quietly. "If understanding what it means to struggle makes me emotionally unstable, then perhaps we should question what kind of stability we're valuing in education." She left the lounge with as much dignity as she could muster, ignoring the whispers that followed her into the hallway. Only when she reached her empty classroom did she allow herself a moment of doubt. Had she gone too far? She couldn't afford to lose this job, not with rent due next week and Melissa needing new glasses. Sinking into her chair, Catherine massaged her temples where a headache was forming. On her desk sat a stack of reading assessments she needed to grade, lesson plans that required revising to accommodate the latest curriculum mandates, and a half-finished grant application for classroom supplies that Principal Hoffman would probably never approve. A soft knock at the open door interrupted her thoughts. Marilyn Spencer stood there holding Catherine's coffee mug that she'd left behind in her hasty exit. "Thought you might need this," Marilyn said, placing the mug on Catherine's desk. Gloria was out of line. "But not wrong," Catherine admitted, wrapping her cold hands around the warm ceramic. "I shouldn't have given Danny my boots. It was impulsive." "It was human," Marilyn corrected, perching on the edge of the desk. "And if we can't be human with these children, what are we doing here?" She paused, studying Catherine's face. "But you're right that it was impulsive. You're going to catch pneumonia walking around in those flats." Do you have any other winter boots at home? Catherine shook her head. I was saving for a new pair for my oldest. She's outgrown hers from last year. I'll figure something out. Marilyn frowned. What size do you wear? I might have an old pair. I'm fine, really, Catherine interrupted, unable to accept charity even when she desperately needed it. I'll pick up something at the thrift store this weekend. Marilyn looked like she wanted to argue, but seemed to understand Catherine's pride. At least let me give you a ride home today. It's supposed to start snowing again this afternoon. Catherine smiled gratefully. That would help, thank you. After Marilyn left, Catherine turned her attention back to her work, determined to push through her mounting exhaustion. She had papers to grade, children to teach, and her own kids to feed. There was no time for self-pity. When the bell rang, signaling the end of the planning period, Catherine got up to greet her students as they returned from lunch. Danny was one of the last to enter, walking carefully in her two large boots. He moved differently now, head a little higher, steps a little surer. They're warm, he said quietly as he passed her desk. The words simple but filled with a gratitude that made Catherine's earlier discomfort worthwhile. Throughout the afternoon, Catherine caught Danny looking at her several times with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. Not just gratitude, but something more complex, as if he were seeing an adult fulfill a promise he hadn't dared to believe in. At dismissal, Catherine watched from the classroom window as students poured out of the building, their colourful coats and hats bright against the grey slush of the playground. Danny was among the last to leave, carefully navigating the icy patches in his borrowed boots. She noticed he stayed along the fence line, away from the other children who might have teased him about his obviously feminine footwear. Just as she was about to turn away, she saw Danny pause and look back at the school. For a moment, their eyes met through the window glass. He raised his hand in a small wave, and Catherine returned the gesture, feeling an unexpected tightness in her throat. That evening, after accepting Marilyn's ride home, Catherine entered her apartment to find her 3 children already there. Melissa, 16 and increasingly responsible, had picked up the younger ones from school and started a pot of pasta on the stove. "Mom, your feet are soaked," Melissa exclaimed when Catherine removed her flats, which had soaked through completely, during her brief walk from Marilyn's car to the apartment building. "Where are your boots?" Catherine hesitated. She tried to shield her children from the hardships of their situation whenever possible, allowing them to believe that things were less precarious than they actually were. "I lent them to a student who needed them more than I did," she said, finally deciding on honesty. "Just until we can find him a proper pair." Melissa's face softened. At 16, she understood more than Catherine sometimes wished she did. "That was kind of you, Mom." "It was foolish," Catherine corrected gently, hanging up her coat. "But sometimes kindness requires a little foolishness, I suppose." Later, that night after the younger children were in bed, Catherine sat at the kitchen table with her checkbook and bills spread before her. The numbers refused to cooperate, no matter how many times she rearranged them. Pay the electric bill in full, and there wouldn't be enough for groceries. Buy groceries, and the electric bill would have to wait, accumulating late fees she couldn't afford. A soft touch on her shoulder startled her. Melissa stood beside her, holding a small envelope. "I've been saving," her daughter said, pressing the envelope into Catherine's hand. "For a pair of those earrings Janie Harrison has, but you need boots more than I need earrings." Catherine opened the envelope to find $27 in carefully folded bills, birthday money, and babysitting earnings saved over months. Tears welled in her eyes. "Sweetheart, no. This is your money." Melissa shook her head, resolute, in a way that reminded Catherine painfully of Thomas in the early days, before disappointment had hardened him. "I want you to have it. You do everything for us, Mom. Let me do this small thing for you." Catherine pulled her daughter close, overwhelmed by this unexpected gift. Not just the money, but the evidence that despite everything, she must be doing something right in raising this compassionate young woman. "Thank you," she whispered into Melissa's hair. "But I can't take your savings. We'll figure something out together, okay?" Melissa pulled back, her young face serious. "You always say we're a team, Mom. Teams look out for each other." Catherine smiled through her tears. "Yes, they do, and this team is going to be just fine." But later, alone in her bedroom, Catherine allowed her optimistic facade to crack. The truth was they weren't fine. The rent had increased last month. Thomas's sporadic child support payments had stopped entirely after he moved to California with his new wife. And now Principal Hoffman was watching her with increased scrutiny, looking for reasons to replace her with someone younger, less expensive. Catherine sat on the edge of her bed, allowing herself 5 minutes, just 5, to acknowledge the fear that constantly lurked beneath her determination. What if she couldn't do this? What if, despite her best efforts, she failed her children, failed her students? The fear sat heavy in her chest, a familiar weight. But as she had done countless times before, Catherine took a deep breath, straightened her shoulders, and put the fear back in its compartment. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. For tonight her children were fed, they had a roof over their heads, and somewhere in the city, a little boy had warm feet because of her. If you are enjoying the story, type 5 in the comments and subscribe for more videos like this. If not, type 0, it helps me create even better content for you. Continuing, the next morning Catherine arrived at school earlier than usual, her feet protected by 2 pairs of socks inside her flats. A poor substitute for boots, but the best she could manage. The janitor, Mr. Petrovich, was mopping the main hallway. When she entered, his weathered face breaking into a smile at the sight of her. "Miss Marshall, always the early bird," he greeted, leaning on his mop. At 72, Ivan Petrovich should have been enjoying retirement, but his meager pension wasn't enough to live on. Like many at Westside, he worked not for fulfillment, but necessity. "Good morning, Mr. Petrovich," Catherine replied, stamping slush from her inadequate shoes. "How's your grandson doing with those math problems?" The old man beamed. "Much better since you gave him those extra worksheets. His mother says he's finally catching up." Catherine had spent several evenings creating specialized materials for Mr. Petrovich's grandson, who struggled with dyscalculia. It wasn't part of her job, the boy wasn't even her student, but she believed education shouldn't be confined to classroom walls or limited to those who learned in conventional ways. "I'm glad to hear it. Tell him I'm proud of his hard work." As Catherine turned toward her classroom, Mr. Petrovich called after her. "Ms. Marshall, what happened to your winter boots? This weather is too harsh for those little shoes." Catherine hesitated. "I'm fine, Mr. Petrovich. Really." The janitor's eyes, shrewd despite his age, studied her with concern. "Wait here," he said, disappearing into his maintenance closet before returning with a pair of rubber galoshes. "These are my spares. Not pretty, but they'll keep your feet dry until you get proper boots again." "I couldn't possibly." "An old man's stubbornness outmatches even yours, Miss Marshall," he interrupted with a wink. "Consider it payment for helping my Nikolai." Recognizing defeat, Catherine accepted the galoshes with genuine gratitude. They were comically large on her, but blessedly waterproof. "Thank you. I'll return them soon." "No rush," Mr. Petrovich waved dismissively. An old Russian saying, "Kindness like grain increases by sowing." As Catherine continued to her classroom, she reflected on the unexpected chain of generosity her impulsive act had initiated. Melissa offering her savings, now Mr. Petrovich with his spare galoshes, small kindnesses that formed a safety net she hadn't realized existed. She was arranging the day's materials when a tentative knock drew her attention to the doorway. Danny stood there, still wearing her boots, his thin frame almost lost in a coat that was clearly second-hand, too large in some places and too small in others. "Good morning, Miss Marshall," he said with careful politeness. "I brought you something." From behind his back he produced a crumpled paper bag. "It's not much, but—" Catherine took the bag, opening it to find a slightly squashed chocolate. Cupcake with sprinkles, the kind sold at the corner store near school. "My mum got a job yesterday," Danny explained, his words tumbling out in a rush. "Night shift cleaning at the hospital. She said I could have a treat. I picked this for you." Catherine's heart constricted. The cupcake probably cost $1, money the Turner family couldn't spare. Yet here was this child, offering his rare treat to her. "Danny, that's very thoughtful," she said, carefully keeping her voice steady. "But this is your celebration. You should enjoy it." He shook his head, resolute. "I want you to have it. For the boots." Mum says we always pay our debts. Understanding the pride behind the gesture, Catherine nodded. Thank you, I'll enjoy it very much. She placed the cupcake carefully on her desk. And congratulations to your mother on her new job. That's wonderful news. Danny nodded, relief visible in his posture. She says maybe next month we can get an apartment. A real one, not the motel. If she keeps the job long enough. I'm sure she will, Catherine assured him, even as she recognized the fragility of such hopes. One sick day, one child care emergency, one bus that didn't come. Any of these could derail the precarious beginnings of stability. May I stay in your class? Danny asked suddenly, vulnerability naked in his eyes. Even if we move to a different neighborhood. Mum says sometimes I might have to change schools. We'll figure something out, Catherine promised, unwilling to offer false certainty but equally unwilling to extinguish this spark of hope. For now, let's focus on today. Would you like to help me write the morning message on the board? As Danny carefully printed the date and weather report, Catherine observed the change in him since yesterday, a slight but significant shift from wariness to cautious optimism. Children were remarkably resilient, she reflected. Given the smallest foothold of security, they could begin to climb toward trust. The morning proceeded without incident. Catherine wore Mr. Petrovich's galoshes whenever she had to walk through the halls, ignoring the quizzical looks from colleagues. During reading circle, she noticed Danny participating more than usual, his hand rising tentatively to answer questions about the story they were discussing. At lunch, Catherine was picking at a sandwich in her classroom when Principal Hoffman appeared at her door, his thin frame silhouetted against the hallway light. Ms. Marshall, a word please. She gestured him in, bracing herself. It's come to my attention that you gave personal items to a student yesterday. He began without preamble, remaining standing to maintain the advantage of height. Your boots, I believe. Danny's shoes had fallen apart completely. He walked to school in wet socks, Catherine explained, keeping her tone professional despite the defensive anger rising in her chest. I understand your intentions were benevolent, Hoffman continued, his tone suggesting the opposite. However, this crosses professional boundaries in ways that concern me. Students must not be singled out for special treatment. With all due respect, Mr. Hoffman, responding to a child's specific needs isn't special treatment. It's just good teaching. Hoffman's jaw tightened. We are educators, not social workers. If every teacher gave away personal items to needy students, where would it end? We'd have a staff walking around barefoot and a student body that expects handouts rather than developing self-reliance. Catherine bit back a more heated response. Perhaps there's a middle ground, she suggested instead. I've been meaning to organize a winter clothing drive. Many families have outgrown coats and boots they'd be happy to donate. Hoffman considered this, his expression calculating. Her clothing drive would reflect well on the school at minimal administrative cost. That could be acceptable, he conceded, provided it's handled systematically, with proper documentation and equal distribution. Of course, Catherine agreed, knowing that equal distribution wasn't actually what these children needed. They needed equitable access based on individual circumstances. But she would work within Hoffman's parameters and still find ways to ensure the most vulnerable students received what they truly required. One more thing, Hoffman added, pausing at the door. The Turner boys' attendance has been spotty at best. If it doesn't improve, we'll need to file a report with DCFS. I assume you'll communicate that to the family in a way that motivates compliance rather than defensiveness. The threat was thinly veiled, improve Danny's attendance or face. A child welfare investigation that could potentially separate him from his mother. Catherine nodded stiffly, knowing that such reports rarely led to actual support for struggling families, instead often creating new traumas under the guise of protection. After Hoffman left, Catherine sat motionless at her desk, the remainder of her lunch forgotten. The clothing drive was a small victory, but Hoffman's final warning troubled her deeply. She understood the importance of regular attendance, but she also understood the complex realities that prevented it, realities that bureaucratic systems rarely accommodated. When her students returned from lunch, Catherine observed Danny more carefully. Now that she looked for it, she could see signs of his precarious living situation. The same shirt worn multiple days, the careful way he conserved his pencil down to a nub, the habit of pocketing half his snack for later. Most concerning was his occasional distant gaze, the moments when fatigue seemed to overwhelm him mid-lesson. After school, Catherine made a decision. Instead of riding home with Marilyn, she would visit the motel where Danny and his mother were staying. Not to threaten or pressure, but to build a bridge of understanding that might help them navigate the institutional waters threatening to engulf them. The Western Lights Motel sat just off the interstate, its neon sign missing. Several letters, the parking lot dotted with cars in various states of disrepair. Catherine hesitated in the office doorway, suddenly uncertain. Would her presence be seen as supportive or intrusive? Would Danny's mother resent this unexpected visit from a teacher who might represent yet another authority figure passing judgment? Before she could reconsider, a voice called from across the parking lot. "Miss Marshall, is that you?" Danny emerged from between two parked cars, a plastic bag of groceries clutched in one hand. Surprise and confusion played across his features. "Hello, Danny," Catherine said, trying to sound casual. "I was hoping to speak with your mother. Is she here?" Danny's expression turned guarded. "She's sleeping. She works nights now, remember?" "Of course," Catherine said, mentally berating herself for the oversight. "I shouldn't have come unannounced. I just wanted to discuss some school matters with her." "Is it about me missing days?" Danny asked directly, his young face suddenly much older. "Because sometimes the bus doesn't come, and it's too far to walk when it's really cold. And sometimes Mom needs help with my little sister, especially now that she's working nights." Catherine hadn't known there was a younger sibling. Another piece of the puzzle slotted into place. "I understand, Danny. That's actually what I wanted to talk about. Finding solutions, not creating problems." Danny studied her face as if assessing her sincerity. "She'll be up at 4, he said finally, "before she has to leave for work. If you want to come back then." "I'll do that," Catherine promised. "And Danny, you're not in trouble. I'm not here to make things harder for you or your mom." He nodded, not entirely convinced, but willing to reserve judgment. "I should go. Nina's alone." "Your sister is here by herself?" Catherine couldn't keep the concern from her voice. "Just for a few minutes while I got milk," Danny explained defensively. "She's 4, not a baby, and I locked the door. Mom says I'm old enough to watch her for short times." Catherine nodded, careful not to signal disapproval that might alienate him. "Of course, I'll see you tomorrow at school, Danny." As she turned to leave, Danny called after her, "Miss Marshall, the boots are really helping, thank you." The simple gratitude in his voice made Catherine's earlier confrontation with Hoffman seem distant and unimportant. This was why she taught, not for administrative approval or professional advancement, but for moments like this when she could make a tangible difference in a child's life. Walking back to the bus stop, Catherine formulated a plan. She would return at 4 to meet with Danny's mother. She would explain the attendance concerns without judgment, offering solutions rather than criticism. Perhaps they could arrange carpooling with another family. Maybe Catherine herself could pick Danny up on particularly cold days. And beyond the immediate issue of attendance, she wanted to connect Danny's mother to resources that might help stabilize their situation. The hospital where she worked might have emergency housing assistance. The school could provide free breakfast and lunch, and Catherine knew of several community organizations that offered after-school programs where Nina could stay while their mother slept. It wouldn't be enough. Catherine understood all too well how systems designed to help often fell catastrophically short, but it would be a start, a small step toward ensuring that Danny had more than just warm feet, but a path forward that might eventually lead him out of that motel room to somewhere stable and safe. As she boarded the bus that would take her home, Catherine allowed herself a moment of reflection. How strange that the simple act of giving away her boots had led her here, expanding her understanding of Danny's life and deepening her commitment to supporting him beyond the classroom walls. Sometimes teaching meant following unexpected paths, discovering needs she couldn't have anticipated, but now couldn't ignore. The bus lurched forward, carrying Catherine back to her own children, her own struggles. She would return to the Western Lights Motel at 4, not as Miss Marshall, the teacher, but as Catherine, the human being, reaching across the divide that separated their lives but not their shared humanity. The weeks that followed Catherine's meeting with Danny's mother, Elaine Turner, brought gradual but significant changes to both of their lives. Elaine had initially been defensive, her thin face tight with suspicion, when Catherine arrived at the motel room. But exhaustion and desperation had eventually overcome pride, allowing her to accept the teacher's offered assistance. Catherine had successfully organized the winter clothing drive at Westside Elementary, using the opportunity to discreetly ensure that Danny received a proper pair of winter boots, a heavy coat, and several warm sweaters. Other children in need benefited as well, with Catherine carefully matching donations to specific students while maintaining the appearance of equal distribution that Hoffman had insisted upon. Danny's attendance improved dramatically. Catherine had arranged a carpool with the mother of another student who lived near the motel, and on particularly harsh weather days, she picked him up herself on her way to school. With regular attendance came academic improvement. Danny proved to be remarkably bright, quickly catching up to his peers once his basic needs were more consistently met. But February brought new challenges. The hospital where Elaine worked reduced her hours, cutting her already meager income. The motel raised its weekly rates, and Catherine herself faced mounting financial pressure as the heating bills for her apartment reached astronomical heights during an unusually brutal cold snap. On a Wednesday morning in mid-February, Catherine arrived at school to find a notice in her mailbox. The faculty meeting scheduled for that afternoon would address staffing adjustments for the upcoming academic year. The euphemism wasn't lost on her. Budget cuts were coming, and non-tenured teachers like herself would be the first casualties. The day passed in a blur of anxiety that Catherine fought to keep from her students. During her lunch break, she retreated to her classroom to review her finances, tallying up the mounting bills against her dwindling savings. The numbers refused to align in any manageable way. Melissa had taken on a weekend job at the local grocery store, insisting that she could balance work with her studies. Catherine's youngest, 7-year-old Timothy, needed dental work that their insurance only partially covered. And Jacob, her middle child at 12, had outgrown nearly all his winter clothes. Catherine had been patching and mending, making do, with hand-me-downs and thrift store finds, but even these stopgap measures required money she increasingly didn't have. A soft knock interrupted her calculations. Danny stood in the doorway holding a folded piece of paper. "My mom asked me to give you this," he said, placing it carefully on her desk. "She said it's important." Catherine unfolded the note, written on the back of a hospital cafeteria receipt, the only paper Elaine had available. "Ms. Marshall, they're evicting us from the motel tomorrow. Manager says we're 3 days late on payment. I'm trying to find somewhere, but shelters are full because of the cold. Can Danny stay with someone from school for a night or two? I'll keep Nina with me. I'm sorry to ask. Elaine." Catherine felt the floor shift beneath her. She had known. The Turners' situation was precarious, but hadn't realized it had reached this crisis point. The thought of Danny and his family with nowhere to go in this bitter February weather was unbearable. "Is everything okay, Miss Marshall?" Danny asked, his young face creased with worry. He was too perceptive, too accustomed to reading the facial expressions of adults whose decisions controlled his fate. "Everything will be fine," Catherine assured him, making a split-second decision she knew she might later regret. "Tell your mum that both you and Nina can stay with me and my family until she finds a new place. We have room." They didn't. Not really. Her 3-bedroom apartment was already crowded with her own children, but Catherine couldn't bear the alternative, couldn't stomach the thought of Danny and his little sister sleeping in a car or separated from their mother in the system of temporary foster placements that so often became permanent disruptions. Danny's eyes widened. "Really? You'd let us stay with you?" "Of course," Catherine said, her voice steadier than she felt. "That's what friends do for each other." The rest of the afternoon passed in a haze as Catherine mentally rearranged her apartment, calculating how to accommodate 2 more children. Timothy could share his room with Danny. Melissa had a trundle bed where Nina could sleep. It would be tight, chaotic even, but temporary, just until Elaine found stable housing. The faculty meeting confirmed Catherine's fears. Principal Hoffman announced that due to district-wide budget cuts, 3 teaching positions would be eliminated for the coming school year. The weeks that followed Catherine's meeting with Danny's mother, Elaine Turner, brought gradual but significant changes to both of their lives. Elaine had initially been defensive, her thin face tight with suspicion when Catherine arrived at the motel room. But exhaustion and desperation had eventually overcome pride, allowing her to accept the teacher's offered assistance. Catherine had successfully organized the winter clothing drive at Westside Elementary, using the opportunity to discreetly ensure that Danny received a proper pair of winter boots, a heavy coat, and several warm sweaters. Other children in need benefited as well, with Catherine carefully matching donations to specific students while maintaining the appearance of equal distribution that Hoffman had insisted upon. Danny's attendance improved dramatically. Catherine had arranged a carpool with the mother of another student who lived near the motel, and on particularly harsh weather days, she picked him up herself on her way to school. With regular attendance came academic improvement. Danny proved to be remarkably bright, quickly catching up to his peers once his basic needs were more consistently met. But February brought new challenges. The hospital where Elaine worked reduced her hours, cutting her already meager income. The motel raised its weekly rates, and Catherine herself faced mounting financial pressure as the heating bills for her apartment reached astronomical heights during an unusually brutal cold snap. On a Wednesday morning in mid-February, Catherine arrived at school to find a notice in her mailbox. The faculty meeting scheduled for that afternoon would address staffing adjustments for the upcoming academic year. The euphemism wasn't lost on her. Budget cuts were coming, and non-tenured teachers like herself would be the first casualties. The day passed in a blur of anxiety that Catherine fought to keep from her students. During her lunch break, she retreated to her classroom to review her finances, tallying up the mounting bills against her dwindling savings. The numbers refused to align in any manageable way. Melissa had taken on a weekend job at the local grocery store, insisting that she could balance work with her studies. Catherine's youngest, 7-year-old Timothy, needed dental work that their insurance only partially covered. And Jacob, her middle child at 12, had outgrown nearly all his winter clothes. Catherine had been patching and mending, making do, with hand-me-downs and thrift store finds, but even these stopgap measures required money she increasingly didn't have. A soft knock interrupted her calculations. Danny stood in the doorway holding a folded piece of paper. "My mom asked me to give you this," he said, placing it carefully on her desk. "She said it's important." Catherine unfolded the note, written on the back of a hospital cafeteria receipt, the only paper Elaine had available. "Ms. Marshall, they're evicting us from the motel tomorrow. Manager says we're 3 days late on payment. I'm trying to find somewhere, but shelters are full because of the cold. Can Danny stay with someone from school for a night or two? I'll keep Nina with me. I'm sorry to ask. Elaine." Catherine felt the floor shift beneath her. She had known the Turners' situation was precarious, but hadn't realized it had reached this crisis point. The thought of Danny and his family with nowhere to go in this bitter February weather was unbearable. "Is everything okay, Ms. Marshall?" Danny asked, his young face creased with worry. He was too perceptive, too accustomed to reading the facial expressions of adults whose decisions controlled his fate. "Everything will be fine," Catherine assured him, making a split-second decision she knew she might later regret. "Tell your mom that both you and Nina can stay with me and my family until she finds a new place. We have room." They didn't. Not really. Her 3-bedroom apartment was already crowded with her own children, but Catherine couldn't bear the alternative, couldn't stomach the thought of Danny and his little sister sleeping in a car or separated from their mother in the system of temporary foster placements that so often became permanent disruptions. Danny's eyes widened. "Really? You'd let us stay with you?" "Of course," Catherine said, her voice steadier than she felt. "That's what friends do for each other." The rest of the afternoon passed in a haze as Catherine mentally rearranged her apartment, calculating how to accommodate 2 more children. Timothy could share his room with Danny. Melissa had a trundle bed where Nina could sleep. It would be tight, chaotic even, but temporary, just until Elaine found stable housing. The faculty meeting confirmed Catherine's fears. Principal Hoffman announced that due to district-wide budget cuts, 3 teaching positions would be eliminated for the coming school year. While he didn't name names, his gaze lingered on Catherine long enough to make his intentions clear. Unless something changed, she would be job hunting come June. After the meeting, she approached him in the hallway. "Mr. Hoffman, I'd like to discuss my position for next year." His thin smile didn't reach his eyes. "Nothing is finalized yet, Ms. Marshall, but seniority will be a significant factor in our decisions." "I've been at Westside for 11 years, she reminded him. "Yes, but with 2 breaks for maternity leave, which affects your continuous service calculation." He adjusted his glasses, a nervous habit he displayed when delivering unpleasant news. "And your recent involvement with the Turner family has raised concerns about professional boundaries." Catherine's jaw tightened. "My efforts to support a student in need have improved his attendance and academic performance. Isn't that our goal as educators?" "Our goal is to educate within appropriate parameters," Hoffman countered. "Your clothing drive was commendable, but giving personal items to students, providing transportation outside official channels, and now I understand you've offered to house the Turner children. That crosses into territory that exposes the school to liability." Catherine flinched. News traveled fast in the small world of Westside Elementary. "Their housing situation is temporary," she said, avoiding a direct confirmation. "And any assistance I provide is as a private citizen, not as a representative of the school." Hoffman's expression made it clear he found this distinction meaningless. "I would advise caution, Ms. Marshall. Your position here is already tenuous. Don't give the board additional reasons to question your judgment." The threat hung in the air between them. Catherine nodded stiffly and turned away, unwilling to let him see how deeply his words had affected her. That evening, Catherine's small apartment buzzed with nervous energy as her children helped prepare for their temporary house guests. Melissa, though initially surprised by her mother's decision, quickly took charge of clearing space in her room for Nina's things. Jacob grumbled about the disruption, but dutifully helped rearrange furniture to create the necessary space. Only Timothy seemed genuinely excited, thrilled at the prospect of a roommate his own age. "Will Danny like my dinosaur books?" he asked, carefully arranging his prized collection on the nightstand they would now share. "I'm sure he will," Catherine assured him, touched by her youngest's eagerness to make Danny feel welcome. At 8 o'clock, Catherine's phone rang. It was Elaine, her voice tight with suppressed emotion. "The manager gave us until morning," she said, "but I found a place. A woman from the hospital is subletting a room in her apartment. It's just one room, but it's something. Only thing is, she can't take us until Friday. Would it still be okay if Danny and Nina stayed with you just for tomorrow night?" "Of course," Catherine replied, relief washing over her. "Bring them whenever you're ready, and Elaine, it's going to be okay. This is temporary." "So you've done more than anyone had to," Elaine said, her voice breaking slightly. "I don't know how to thank you." After hanging up, Catherine sat at her kitchen table, staring at the bills she'd been sorting earlier. One night, she could manage that easily. And perhaps this reprieve meant Elaine was finding her footing, beginning to build the stability that Danny and Nina so desperately needed. The next morning, Catherine dropped off all 5 children at school, her own 3+, Danny and Nina, who would spend the day in the kindergarten class while her mother worked a day shift. The sight of them walking into the building together, Danny holding Nina's small hand protectively, stirred something deep in Catherine's heart. For all the chaos and uncertainty, there was something right about this improvised family they had, formed this mutual support in the face of circumstances that would overwhelm any of them individually. As she parked her car, Catherine noticed Vice Principal Winters watching from the front steps, her disapproving gaze following the procession of children. Catherine squared her shoulders and walked past her without acknowledgement. Let them judge her. Let them question her professional boundaries. She knew in her heart that she was doing what was necessary and right. The school day progressed normally until mid-afternoon, when Catherine was summoned to Principal Hoffman's office. She entered to find not only Hoffman, but also Gloria Winters. and a woman Catherine didn't recognize dressed in a severe suit with a Department of Children and Family Services identification badge clipped to her lapel. "Ms. Marshall," Hoffman began, his tone formal. "This is Ms. Reynolds from DCFS. She has some questions regarding your relationship with the Turner family." Catherine's blood ran cold. "What is this about?" Ms. Reynolds consulted her notepad. "We've received a report expressing concern about potential boundary violations and dependency issues between you and your student Danny Turner. I understand the child and his sister spent last night in your home. Their family faced a temporary housing emergency," Catherine explained, fighting to keep her voice steady. "They needed a safe place for one night while their mother secured a new housing." "And you didn't think to contact proper authorities?" Ms. Reynolds asked. "There are official channels for emergency child placement, official channels that often separate siblings and remove children from parents who are trying their best under impossible circumstances," Catherine countered, unable to contain her frustration. "Elaine Turner works full-time. She cares for her children. She just needed a little help during a crisis." "Your involvement goes beyond this one incident," Gloria interjected. "You've given the boy personal items, provided unauthorized transportation, and shown what some might consider excessive interest in his welfare." The implication in her tone made Catherine's cheeks burn with indignation. "I've shown appropriate concern for a student in need, which I would do for any child in my classroom. Everything I've done has been with his mother's knowledge and consent. Nevertheless," Ms. Reynolds continued, "we have an obligation to investigate when concerns are raised about a child's welfare and the appropriateness of adult relationships in their life." The meeting continued for another 30 minutes, with Catherine defending her actions, while Ms. Reynolds took copious notes. Hoffman and Gloria said little, but their presence spoke volumes about where the concerned report had originated. By the time Catherine was dismissed, the school day had ended. She hurried to her classroom to find Marilyn waiting with Danny, Nina, and her own children. "Gloria told me what's happening," Marilyn said quietly, drawing Catherine aside while the children gathered their belongings. "This is wrong, Catherine. They're punishing you for being human." "They're building a case to terminate me," Catherine replied, keeping her voice low, "and possibly to interfere with Elaine's custody." "What can I do?" Catherine squeezed her friend's hand gratefully. "Just be a witness. Remember what really happened here, not what they're trying to make it into." That evening, as the 5 children ate dinner around Catherine's small kitchen table, the atmosphere was lighter than she would have expected under the circumstances. Nina, a serious 4-year-old with Danny's same watchful eyes, had attached herself to Melissa, following the teenager with obvious admiration. Danny and Timothy had discovered a mutual interest in building elaborate structures with Timothy's collection of wooden blocks. Even Jacob had warmed to their guests, teaching Danny a card game that had them both laughing. After the younger children were bathed and tucked into their temporary sleeping arrangements, Catherine sat alone at the kitchen table, her mind racing. The DCFS investigation might come to nothing, likely would if Elaine secured stable housing quickly, but the threat to Catherine's job was real and immediate. She had already been on Hoffman's list for budget cuts. Now she had given him ample reason to terminate her contract. The thought of losing her position at Westside sent waves of panic through her. Where would she find another teaching job mid-year? How would she support her children? The mortgage on the small apartment was already stretching her resources to the breaking point. A soft footfall drew her attention to the hallway, where Melissa stood in her pajamas, concern etched on her young face. "Mom, are you okay? You look worried." Catherine attempted a reassuring smile. "Just thinking about some work stuff. Nothing for you to worry about." Melissa moved to sit beside her. At 16, she had developed an uncanny ability to see through Catherine's attempts to shield her from adult concerns. "Is it because of Danny and Nina? Are you in trouble for helping them?" Catherine hesitated, then decided on honesty. "There might be some professional consequences, but I would make the same choice again." "Good," Melissa said firmly, "because it was the right thing to do." Catherine studied her daughter's face, struck by the maturity in her eyes. "When did you get so wise?" "I learned from you," Melissa replied simply. You always say that doing the right thing isn't always easy, but it's always worth it. Catherine pulled her daughter into a tight hug, drawing strength from her unwavering support. Whatever challenges lay ahead, with DCFS, with Hoffman, with the precarious balance of her financial situation, she would face them head-on. Because Melissa was right. She had made the right choice, the human choice, and somehow they would weather whatever storm came next. As she held her daughter, Catherine couldn't shake the feeling that she stood at a crossroads. The path ahead was shrouded in uncertainty, but there was no turning back now. For better or worse, her decision to help Danny and his family had set in motion a chain of events that would transform all their lives in ways she couldn't yet imagine. What will happen when Principal Hoffman discovers that Catherine has taken in Danny and Nina? Will Catherine lose her job for crossing professional boundaries? And how will this temporary arrangement impact both families as they struggle to stay afloat in difficult circumstances? March arrived with thinning ice and nascent buds, but Catherine's worries only deepened with the thaw. The DCFS investigation had thankfully been closed after Elaine secured the promised room in her co-worker's apartment. The caseworker had been satisfied that the emergency housing arrangement with Catherine had been temporary and appropriate under the circumstances. But the professional repercussions Catherine had feared materialized with devastating swiftness. 2 weeks after the investigation, she received official notice that her contract would not be renewed for the following school year. The letter cited budget constraints and restructuring needs, but the timing left little doubt about the real reason. "It's not right," Marilyn fumed over coffee in Catherine's classroom during their shared planning period. 11 years of exemplary evaluations, and suddenly you're expendable because you actually cared about a student? Catherine sighed, stirring her coffee absently. "Hoffman's been looking for a reason. I'm more expensive than a first-year teacher, and I ask too many questions about his budget cuts." "You should fight it," Marilyn insisted. "The union would back you." "Maybe," Catherine acknowledged, "but a fight like that could take months, and I need to focus on finding another position for fall." She forced a smile. "Besides, there are other schools, better schools with administrators who actually remember why we became teachers in the first place." But both women knew the reality. Teaching positions were scarce, especially mid-year. Most hiring for fall would happen over the summer, and Catherine's dismissal, however unjust, would raise questions in interviews. She had 3 months of paychecks remaining, and then uncertainty. To complicate matters, her relationship with Danny had only deepened since the night he and Nina had stayed in her home. Though they had returned to their mother the next day as planned, a connection had been forged that transcended the usual teacher-student bond. Danny now trusted Catherine implicitly, sharing his fears and hopes in ways he never had before. He still wore her boots, though they were scuffed now from daily use. When she'd suggested he keep them since they fit him well with thick socks, his face had lit up with a joy that made the sacrifice worthwhile 100 times over. Catherine had continued discreetly supporting the Turner family, sometimes bringing groceries when she knew Elaine's hospital shifts had been cut back, other times finding clothes for the children through community donations. She was careful now to involve Marilyn as a witness to these efforts, documenting everything to protect herself from further accusations of impropriety. On a blustery Wednesday in mid-March, Catherine was grading papers during her lunch break, when Danny appeared in her doorway clutching a wrinkled envelope. "Ms. Marshall, my mom said to give you this." He handed her the envelope, his expression unreadable. "She said it's important, but not bad news." "I asked," he added with a smile that reminded Catherine how much this child had grown in the months she'd known him. Inside the envelope was a letter written on lined paper, torn from a notebook. "Dear Ms. Marshall, I wanted you to be the first to know that I got a full-time position at the hospital. Starting next month, I'll be working in environmental services, with benefits and regular hours. Even better, the hospital has an employee housing assistance program. We've been approved for a subsidized apartment just 3 blocks from Westside Elementary. I know what you did for us cost you professionally. I heard about your contract from other parents. I wish there was something I could do to help you the way you've helped us. Please know that whatever happens, You've changed our lives, and we won't forget. With gratitude, Elaine Turner. Catherine looked up from the letter to find Danny watching her anxiously. This is wonderful news, she told him, genuine happiness pushing aside her own concerns. Your mum must be so proud. Danny nodded, a cautious smile spreading across his face. She cried when she got the call. Good crying, he clarified. And Nina's excited about having her own bedroom. We've never had separate rooms before. When will you move? Next weekend, Danny said. Mum says you should come see it after we're settled. If you want to, he added, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his features. I'd love to, Catherine assured him, touched by the invitation. After Danny left for recess, Catherine reread Elaine's letter, a complex mixture of emotions swirling in her chest. Joy for the Turner family's improving circumstances, bittersweet. Pride in having played a small role in their journey, and beneath it all, the persistent anxiety about her own uncertain future. She had started sending out applications to other schools in the district, but positions were scarce, and the black mark of non-renewal would follow her. She hadn't told her children yet about losing her job, unable to bear the worry it would cause them, especially Melissa, who was preparing for college applications in the fall. That afternoon, as Catherine supervised the children filing out for dismissal, she was surprised to see Elaine waiting among the parents. Instead of her usual scrubs, she wore a simple dress and cardigan, her hair neatly styled rather than hastily, pulled back as Catherine had always seen it. Ms. Marshall, Elaine greeted her, stepping forward as Danny ran to join her. I hope you got my note. I did, Catherine smiled. Congratulations on the job and the apartment. That's wonderful news. Elaine nodded, her thin face animated with rare excitement. I wanted to thank you in person. What you did for us, most people wouldn't have taken that risk. Catherine shook her head. Anyone would have. No, Elaine interrupted gently. They wouldn't. Trust me, I've learned that the hard way over the years. She hesitated, glancing around at the bustling dismissal area. Could we talk somewhere more private? Just for a few minutes? Catherine led her to the now empty classroom, curious about what Elaine might want to discuss that couldn't be said in the hallway. Once the door closed behind them, Elaine spoke with unexpected directness. Danny told me they're not renewing your contract, because of us. Catherine winced. She hadn't realized Danny knew about her situation. It's complicated, she hedged. Budget issues, staffing decisions. Please, Elaine cut in. I've spent my life reading between the lines of polite explanations for why doors are closed to people like me. I know when someone's paying a price for doing the right thing. Catherine didn't deny it further. There was something liberating in being seen so clearly, in not having to minimize or explain away the injustice. What will you do? Elaine asked, genuine concern in her voice. Find another teaching position, hopefully, Catherine replied with more confidence than she felt. There are other schools. Elaine studied her with penetrating eyes that reminded Catherine of Danny's. My brother works in construction, she said after a moment. His company is renovating a charter school on the north side. They're expanding and hiring teachers for fall. It's not exactly like West Side. It's more focused on arts integration, but it's a good school. He could put in a word for you, if you're interested. The offer took Catherine by surprise. She had been so focused on supporting Elaine that the reversal of roles, Elaine now offering her assistance, felt almost disorienting. That would be incredibly helpful, she admitted. I've been sending out applications, but it's tough this time of year. Elaine nodded. I'll have him call you. She glanced at her watch. We should go. Nina's waiting with a neighbor. At the door, she paused. Ms. Marshall, Catherine, thank you. Not just for the big things, but for seeing us, for treating us like we matter. You do matter, Catherine said simply. All of you do. After Elaine and Danny left, Catherine remained in her classroom, reflecting on their conversation. There was something healing in the exchange, in being seen not just as a helper, but as a human being with her own vulnerabilities and needs. That evening, Catherine finally told her children about the non-renewal of her contract. She had expected tears, especially from Timothy, who was sensitive to any disruption, but their reaction surprised her. That's so unfair, Jacob exploded, his adolescent sense of justice inflamed. "You're the best teacher at that stupid school. Can they even do that?" Melissa asked, her pragmatic mind immediately focusing on the legalities. "Don't you have rights? Through the union?" Catherine explained her options, the possibility of appealing through the union, the likelihood of a protracted battle, the potential stigma that might follow her to future positions. "So, what will you do?" Melissa finally asked, the responsible older child already calculating the financial implications for their family. Catherine thought of Elaine's offer, a small ray of hope in an otherwise bleak professional landscape. "I'm exploring some options," she said carefully. "A charter school on the north side might have openings, and I still have my position through June, so there's time." Later, after the younger children had gone to bed, Melissa found Catherine at the kitchen table, scrutinizing their family budget for places to cut expenses. "Mom," she said, sliding into the chair across from her, "I've been thinking. If money gets tight this summer, I could defer college for a year, work full-time and save up, then start next fall." Catherine looked up sharply. "Absolutely not. We're not even going to consider that." "But no, Melissa. You've worked too hard. Your education comes first." Catherine reached across the table to squeeze her daughter's hand. "We'll be okay. I still have some savings and I'll find another position. There are always summer school opportunities, tutoring jobs. You always take care of everyone else," Melissa said quietly. "Who takes care of you?" The question caught Catherine off guard, exposing a vulnerability she usually kept carefully hidden from her children. For a moment she couldn't answer, the truth too raw to voice. No one. Since Thomas left, there had been no one to lean on, no one to share the burden of decisions and worries, no one to hold her when the weight became too much to bear alone. "We take care of each other," she finally said, opting for the safer, partial truth. "That's what families do." Melissa didn't look convinced, but she didn't press further. As she left the kitchen, she paused in the doorway. "You did the right thing helping Danny and his family. I'm proud that you're my mom." The words hung in the air long after Melissa had gone to bed, a balm to Catherine's wounded spirit. Whatever challenges lay ahead, finding a new job, stretching their limited finances, rebuilding her professional reputation, hearing her daughter articulate such unequivocal support, made the burdens easier to bear. The next morning brought a small but significant surprise. As Catherine entered her classroom, she found Mr. Petrovich quietly mopping the floor, though it wasn't his usual day to clean her room. "Good morning, Mr. Petrovich," she greeted him. "You didn't have to do this today." The old janitor straightened, leaning on his mop. "I heard what they're doing to you," he said without preamble. "It's not right." Catherine sighed. "News travels fast. In a school, like wildfire." He shook his head in disgust. "Hoffman has no soul. He forgets that a school is not a business. Children are not products." "It's okay," Catherine began. But Mr. Petrovich cut her off with a dismissive wave. "It is not okay, but it will be." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a folded piece of paper, which he handed to Catherine. "My daughter teaches at Lincoln Park High School. They need a special education teacher for next year. The pay is better than here. You'd be good for the position." Catherine unfolded the paper to find contact information for the department chair at Lincoln Park High School, along with a note indicating that applications were being accepted through April. "I'm not certified in special education," she said, touched by the gesture but uncertain of its practicality. "You have summer to get." "Emergency certification," Mr. Petrovich replied, with the pragmatism of someone who had navigated many systems in his long life. "My daughter says they're desperate. Good teachers for special needs are hard to find." Catherine tucked the paper into her bag. "Thank you, Mr. Petrovich. I'll look into it." The old man nodded, satisfied. "Good. And know this, many here support you. Not everyone has Hoffman's courage to speak it, but they know what is right." He pointed to her desk, where Catherine now noticed a small potted plant that hadn't been there yesterday. "From the cafeteria ladies," he explained. "They too have seen how you care for the hungry children." After he left, Catherine examined the plant, a small African violet in a decorated terracotta pot. A handwritten card nestled among the leaves read simply, "Teachers plant seeds that grow forever. Thank you for caring." Catherine placed the violet on her windowsill, oddly moved by this simple acknowledgement from women she exchanged pleasantries with but rarely spoke to at length. It seemed that while her actions had cost her professionally with administration, they had forged connections with others in the school community who shared her values, if not her willingness to act on them, openly. Throughout the day, small gestures accumulated. A handwritten note from the school nurse tucked into her mailbox, a homemade muffin left anonymously on her desk during lunch, a quiet word of support from a parent at dismissal who had heard about her non-renewal through the school grapevine. By the time the final bell rang, Catherine felt a shift in her perspective. She had been viewing her situation primarily through the lens of loss of job security, professional standing, financial stability. But these expressions of solidarity revealed another dimension, the community she had built through years of quiet service and genuine care. As the students filed out, Danny lingered behind. "Ms. Marshall, I made something for you." He pulled a folded sheet of construction paper from his backpack. "It's not very good, but..." Catherine opened it to find a carefully drawn picture of herself, surrounded by stick-figure children. Atop the page, in Danny's improving penmanship, were the words, "The best teacher ever." "Danny, it's wonderful," she said sincerely, blinking back sudden tears. "Thank you, I'll keep it always." He nodded, satisfied with her reaction. "My mom says sometimes good people have bad things happen to them, but she also says that good always comes back somehow." He looked up at her with those serious eyes that had seen too much for his years. "I think good things will come back to you, Miss Marshall." As Danny hurried to catch up with his classmates, Catherine carefully pinned his drawing to her bulletin board. Out of the jumble of uncertainties and anxieties that had dominated her thoughts since receiving her non-renewal notice, a new perspective was gradually taking shape, one that acknowledged the pain of rejection but refused to be defined by it. She had followed her conscience and stayed true to her values. While the official systems had punished her for this choice, a different kind of community had emerged to affirm it. Perhaps, as both Danny and Elaine seemed to believe, good would indeed return, not through the official channels of employment contracts and professional advancement, but through the more enduring currency of human connection and mutual care. Catherine gathered her papers, switched off the classroom lights and stepped into the hallway, closing the door behind her. Whatever lay ahead, she would face it with the knowledge that doing the right thing, though costly, had woven her into a web of relationships that no termination notice could sever. April arrived with a riot of daffodils pushing through the softening earth and cherry blossoms frosting the trees in the small park near Catherine's apartment. Spring's promise of renewal offered a metaphorical comfort that Catherine clung to as she navigated the increasingly turbulent waters of her professional situation. Word of her non-renewal had spread through Westside Elementary, creating uncomfortable divisions among the staff. Some colleagues avoided her entirely, as if job loss might be contagious. Others expressed sympathy, but maintained careful distance from any action that might align them with her in administration's eyes. A small but vocal minority, led by Marilyn, had begun openly questioning Hoffman's decision, creating tensions that made faculty meetings nearly unbearable. Catherine tried to remain above the fray, focusing on her students and the remaining weeks of the school year, but the strain showed in small ways: the occasional distracted response during lessons, the dark circles under her eyes that makeup couldn't quite conceal, the slight tremor in her hands when Principal Hoffman conducted his increasingly frequent classroom observations. On a bright Tuesday morning, Catherine arrived at school to find Danny waiting by her classroom door, vibrating with barely contained excitement. "Ms. Marshall, we moved in on Saturday," he announced as soon as she approached. "We have real beds, not just mattresses, and a kitchen with a stove that actually works." His enthusiasm was infectious, momentarily dispelling Catherine's worries. "That's wonderful, Danny," she smiled, unlocking her classroom. "How does it feel to have your own place again?" "It's awesome," he declared. "And guess what? There's a park right across the street. Mom says when the weather gets warmer, Nina can play there while I do my homework." As the other students began trickling in, Danny lowered his voice. Mom still wants you to come see it. Maybe this weekend. She's making lasagna on Sunday. The invitation touched Catherine deeply. Despite her own precarious situation, the knowledge that Danny and his family had found stability, that they were thriving, provided a profound satisfaction that transcended her personal worries. I'd love to, she told him. Thank you for inviting me. Throughout the morning lessons, Catherine found her spirits lifted by Danny's transformation. The cautious, watchful child of winter had blossomed into an engaged, enthusiastic learner. He participated eagerly in class discussions, volunteered to read aloud, and even joined a group of boys during recess for a game of basketball, social integration that would have been unthinkable months earlier. At lunch, Marilyn joined Catherine in her classroom, bringing sandwiches from the deli across the street. You need to eat something besides those sad, frozen meals, she declared, pushing a turkey club toward Catherine. How are you holding up? Catherine unwrapped the sandwich gratefully. Better today. Danny's family moved into their new apartment over the weekend. You should see him, Marilyn. He's like a different child. Because of you, Marilyn pointed out. Because of his mother's hard work and determination, Catherine corrected. I just helped with a few stepping stones along the way. Marilyn shook her head in fond exasperation, always deflecting credit. One of these days you're going to have to acknowledge the impact you have on people's lives. Speaking of impact, Catherine said, changing the subject, I have an interview next week at that charter school Elaine told me about, Northside Arts Academy. They have an opening for a third-grade teacher starting in August. That's fantastic, Marilyn exclaimed, though selfishly, I hate the thought of not seeing you every day. Westside won't be the same without you. If I get the position, Catherine cautioned. It's competitive. They're expanding, but they have specific pedagogical approaches I'm not familiar with. Arts integration, project-based learning. You'll be brilliant, Marilyn assured her. How you've been incorporating those methods for years, even if you didn't use the fancy terminology. Catherine smiled at her friend's unwavering confidence. We'll see. I'm also looking into that special education certification Mr. Petrovich mentioned. It would mean summer classes, but it might open more doors. How are you affording all this? Marilyn asked, concern creeping into her voice. Certification courses aren't cheap. Catherine hesitated, uncomfortable discussing finances even with her closest friend. I'm managing. I've taken on some weekend tutoring, and Melissa's job helps with groceries. What she didn't mention was the growing stack of past due notices hidden in her kitchen drawer, or the fact that she'd started skipping meals herself to ensure her children had enough. The financial strain of impending unemployment pressed on her constantly, a physical weight that made her shoulders ache and her sleep restless. If you need help, Marilyn began. We're fine, Catherine interrupted with gentle firmness. Really? After school that day, Catherine stayed late to prepare materials for the following week's lessons. The building was quiet, most teachers having hurried home to enjoy the unexpectedly warm spring afternoon. As she worked, her mind drifted to the upcoming interview at Northside Arts Academy. She had researched their curriculum philosophy, impressed by their commitment to reaching children through multiple modalities. It seemed like a place where she could thrive professionally, perhaps even more than at Westside, with its increasingly rigid standardization. A sharp knock startled her from her thoughts. Gloria Winters stood in the doorway, her angular frame silhouetted against the hallway light. Working late, Catherine. The vice principal's tone was casual, but her eyes were calculating as they surveyed the classroom. Just preparing for next week, Catherine replied, keeping her voice neutral despite the tension that immediately tightened her shoulders. Gloria entered uninvited, examining the student work displayed on the walls. Your creative writing projects are quite advanced for third grade, she observed, particularly impressive given the challenges some of your students face. Her gaze lingered on Danny's paper, his improvement over the school year evident in the confident handwriting and complex sentence structures. They've worked hard, Catherine said, uncertain where this unexpected praise was leading. Gloria turned to face her directly. I hear you're interviewing at Northside Arts Academy. News truly did travel at the speed of light in the small world of Chicago education. Yes, Catherine confirmed, seeing no reason to deny it. Next week. It's a good school, Gloria acknowledged. Progressive, less structured than what you're accustomed to here. Change can be invigorating, Catherine replied carefully. Gloria's thin lips curved in what might have been a smile. Indeed, though sometimes familiar constraints provide necessary guidance. She paused, studying Catherine with an intensity that felt invasive. I'm curious. If Northside were to offer you a position, would you withdraw your appeal to the union regarding your non-renewal? So that was it. Catherine had indeed filed an appeal through the teachers' union, though with limited hope for its success. Catherine's heart pounded as Gloria's question hung in the charged silence of the empty classroom. She searched for steady words. I believe in standing by what's right, Catherine said softly, locking eyes with the vice principal. My appeal isn't a ploy to tarnish anyone's reputation. It's a matter of principle. I will not be forced to recant my dedication to my students just to appease an administration that values cost-cutting over caring. Gloria's gaze flickered, a mixture of curiosity and disapproval crossing her features. You understand, Catherine, that these decisions have consequences. Beyond the classroom? She replied slowly. Your appeal undermines the narrative they want to create. It forces them to acknowledge that sometimes compassion isn't measured in dollars. Catherine exhaled, recalling all the nights spent poring over bills and lesson plans while her heart ached for every child who needed something she couldn't always provide. I understand that, she said, voice steadier than she felt. But if we sacrifice our humanity, what are we left with? I'm not asking for leniency. I'm insisting that our work as educators must include caring for our students in every way we can, even if that means breaking a few unwritten rules. Gloria's eyes narrowed. I'm merely curious if you'd be willing to make concessions. If Northside Arts Academy extends you an offer, would you withdraw your appeal? The question struck Catherine like a physical blow. She had not considered the possibility of abandoning her union fight for a secure future, even though the threat of unemployment loomed large over her life. She paused, then said, I have to believe that standing up for what is right will eventually open better doors than any compromise could. I won't be pressured into silencing my conscience. My appeal stands. My commitment to my students stands. Gloria's expression was unreadable as she left the room, leaving Catherine with a mixture of defiance and uncertainty. For a long moment, Catherine sat at her desk, feeling the weight of every decision pressing upon her. The gentle hum of the empty hallway provided a counterpoint to the turmoil in her chest. That evening, as dusk settled over the city, Catherine found herself alone in her modest apartment, the silence punctuated by the soft ticking of the clock and the distant hum of traffic. She sat at her kitchen table, the small African violet, from Mr. Petrovich, resting in a glass of water beside a stack of union correspondence and job applications. The drawing from Danny, taped to the refrigerator earlier that day, seemed to whisper promises of redemption. In that drawing, a stick figure version of herself stood proudly with a smile, surrounded by children whose lives she had touched. The simple words, "the best teacher ever," were written in Danny's earnest scrawl. As the night deepened, Catherine allowed herself to remember the moments that had defined her years at Westside. She recalled the day she lent her boots to a shivering Danny on a bitter winter morning, the way his eyes had lit up with quiet gratitude, a moment that had ignited within her an unyielding desire to do more for those who needed it most. She thought of the winter clothing drive she had organized, and the secret smiles and whispered thanks that followed each small act of kindness. Even now, when professional doors were closing and the weight of injustice pressed down upon her, those memories glimmered like tiny embers of hope. A knock on her apartment door broke the silence. It was Melissa, her face lit with a mix of determination and worry. "Mom, I just got a call from someone at the school district," Melissa announced, holding a crumpled envelope in her hand. "They said there's a special award being given to a teacher who made a significant impact on her students, one that embodies the spirit of compassion and innovation. They're looking for nominations, and I already submitted your name." Catherine's eyes widened in disbelief. "An award? For me?" she murmured, incredulous yet touched. Melissa's nod was firm. Yes, Mom. It's called the Heart of Education Award. You're the only teacher I know who puts her heart into everything, even when it costs her dearly. I think they should recognize that. The idea settled over Catherine like a balm. Though her contract had been non-renewed and uncertainty loomed large, this unexpected recognition lit a small beacon of possibility. In that moment, Catherine realized that even if she lost her job, her work would not be forgotten. Her efforts had sown seeds far beyond the confines of Westside Elementary, nurturing growth in hearts and minds alike. Days turned into weeks, and spring ripened into summer. Catherine juggled her dwindling finances with the relentless pursuit of new teaching opportunities. She attended interviews at several schools, including Northside Arts Academy, where she demonstrated her innovative approaches to arts integration and project-based learning. At each interview, she spoke passionately about her belief that education was about forging genuine connections and empowering students to overcome adversity. Although some interviewers were hesitant because of the controversy surrounding her non-renewal, many recognized the authenticity in her eyes. One bright morning in early June, Catherine received a phone call from the charter school Elaine had mentioned. Her heart fluttered as she listened to the warm voice on the other end. Ms. Marshall, we've reviewed your application and are very impressed with your record and your dedication. We'd like to offer you a position at Northside Arts Academy as a third-grade teacher, with the understanding that you'll work on integrating our arts-based curriculum. The words washed over her like a long-awaited rain after a drought. Thank you so much, Catherine managed, her voice trembling with gratitude and relief. I won't let you down. The new position meant that Catherine would be leaving Westside, a place that had been both a home and a battleground. The thought of parting with her beloved students, especially Danny, filled her with bittersweet sorrow. But change, she knew, was inevitable. As she prepared to say farewell, Catherine made it her mission to ensure a smooth transition for every child whose life she had touched. In the weeks leading up to her departure, she organized extra sessions for struggling students, wrote personal notes of encouragement, and even arranged for a community mural project that celebrated the spirit of learning and hope. Then, nearly 2 years later, an unexpected opportunity arrived that would forever change Catherine's life. One autumn day, while she was deep in lesson planning at Northside Arts Academy, the school principal approached her with a look of excitement that she hadn't seen in years. "Ms. Marshall, there's someone here to see you," he said. "Danny Turner is here." Catherine's heart skipped a beat. It had been a long time since she'd seen the once timid boy who had grown into a confident young man. As she stepped into the hallway, she spotted him at the entrance. A man now in his mid-20s, dressed in a sharp suit, his eyes still holding that familiar warmth and determination. "Ms. Marshall," he greeted, his voice steady and full of gratitude. "I'm Danny Turner." Before Catherine could speak, Danny continued, "I know I owe you more than a simple thank you. When you gave me those boots and all the care you showed me, you changed the course of my life. I worked hard, earned scholarships, and eventually built a career that allowed me to do something incredible." He paused, his gaze never wavering. "I've bought an entire school, a place where children can learn and grow without being judged by their circumstances, and I want you to be the heart of that school. Will you come with me and help shape its future?" Tears welled in Catherine's eyes as the past and present converged in a moment of profound transformation. The hardships, the rejections, and every sacrifice she had made over the years were now being repaid in a way she had never dared to dream. "Yes," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I'll come with you. I'll help you build that future." In that moment, all the struggles and sacrifices crystallized into a single truth. Compassion had the power to break down barriers and create a legacy that could outlive even the harshest challenges. The new school, soon to be known as Turner Academy, would be a beacon of hope and opportunity, a place where every child's potential would be nurtured regardless of their background. And at its center, Catherine would stand as a testament to the transformative power of kindness. Over the next few months, preparations for the school's grand opening unfolded like a dream. Danny, now a successful hospital administrator and philanthropist, poured his heart and resources into every detail. Catherine's innovative teaching methods were integrated into the academy's curriculum, and community members joined forces to ensure that no child would ever have to endure the hardships that so many had suffered before. On the opening day of Turner Academy, Catherine walked through the gleaming corridors of the new building with tears of joy in her eyes. As she greeted children and staff alike, she reflected on her long, winding journey, from a struggling teacher in a frayed elementary school to a pioneer in a revolutionary educational institution. In every smile and every hopeful glance of a young student, she saw the ripple effect of the small acts of kindness that had defined her career. Standing in the central courtyard beneath a canopy of blossoming trees, Catherine turned to Danny, who had been waiting with a gentle smile. "Thank you," she said simply, "for believing in me and for giving me a chance to make a difference on a scale I never imagined." Danny placed a hand over hers. "It was your kindness that changed my life," he replied. "Now it's time for you to see just how many lives you've changed. This school is not just a building, it's a living, breathing promise. That good will always come back." And it all began with a pair of boots. In that embrace, Catherine understood that her life's work was far from over. Each step forward was a continuation of the legacy of care, a promise that even in the harshest winters, the seeds of compassion would one day blossom into something extraordinary. As the sun dipped below the horizon and laughter echoed across the courtyard, Catherine knew that, despite every hardship, the power of kindness had indeed come full circle. Congratulations. Type 9 in the comments so that I know you stayed until the end with me. Thank you for watching, and until tomorrow's story on this same channel.